You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
Everyone, welcome to the Sexpert interview. Today, my guest is Nate Bagley. Nate and I have been friends for a few years. We belong to a few of the same Facebook groups, and he does a lot of amazing things for marriages. Just getting to know him better, he wrote a dating advice column for his university and college. He packed up his bags, sold his belongings, and toured the country for a year and a half, recording interviews with married couples on what made love great. He's been a TEDx speaker and is the founder of Growth Marriage. Nate, I'm really honored to have you on today.
Dan, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. So you do a lot of really interesting things to help couples. You have this like fire within you to really strengthen marriages. And I think a lot of it has come from your experience. You're married a little later in life, so to speak, compared to the norm in our area. And but you've always had this like passion for marriages.
Yeah, even before I was married.
That's awesome. We were talking in one of our groups earlier, which prompted this interview about nice guys and how we kind of grow up wanting to be a nice guy, to please others, to always do the right thing. Yet we've noticed that nice guys tend to have bad sex lives. And that's kind of what I want to dive into today and talk a little bit about.
Yeah, it's a great topic. And I think there's a lot to unpack here, but if I can just give a little bit of personal backstory to my own nice guy experiences, I think the reason that I got married later in life is in large part because I am a recovering nice guy. I was and still am, but now I'm conscious of it, a nice guy. And as we'll kind of talk about in this conversation, I'll give you a little bit of a teaser. Part of the reason that it took me so long to find a partner and to get married is because I had a very low tolerance for conflict. And it was very scary for me to reveal parts of myself that I was ashamed of. And so that kind of put the kibosh on any intimacy I could develop with a partner. And because they couldn't ever really get to know me for who I was, I never got close enough to anybody to actually get to that place where we could get married. So we can talk more about what that looks like and why it was so important. But nice guy syndrome has played a very large role in my life and not ever a good one. And so this is why I'm so passionate about talking about this topic, is because I've experienced the negative impact that it can have on my life, on anybody's life.
Before we go further, let's talk about a definition of a nice guy. Because I think being a nice guy is a good thing, but we mean something a little different when we say nice guy in this context.
Yeah, I've actually started to associate the word nice with something negative because of this nice guy definition. And I prefer the term kind is the positive connotation. And I feel like nice is the veneer of kindness, the fake version of kindness. And kind of let me explain. I'll see if I can give a definition of nice guy, and maybe that'll provide some clarity. So a nice guy is somebody who is fiercely committed to creating an ideal image of themselves in the world, because they believe deep down that they are only worthy of love if they do the right things, if they're good, if other people perceive them as enough. And so they put a lot of time and a lot of effort into creating a persona, a public face that other people will approve of. They check all the right boxes, they meet all the right expectations, because their self-worth is so dependent on other people's approval of them. That is a nice guy.
Gotcha. So they're kind of hollow inside and they need it filled by what others think of them.
Yeah, they're hollow inside. They have secrets. They're scared. They're ashamed. There's all sorts of things going on inside a nice guy's heart and mind, whether consciously or subconsciously, that make them afraid to be truly seen. And so they put all of their effort into hiding things that they don't want people to know, and then also promoting a magnified positivity, like putting a magnifying glass over their positive attributes whilst hiding their negative ones.
Gotcha. They want to exaggerate the positive
Yeah,
and sweep away the negative under the rug.
exactly.
Uh, so, in contrast, the kind guy looks different.
Yes, very different. I think a kind guy does nice things or kind things, not because they're trying to get approval from others, but because it's part of who they are. It's part of their character. There's not technically anything in it for them, whereas nice guys typically have a hidden agenda in a lot of ways. So
Gotcha. Well, let's talk more about that. What are the signs? How do you know if you're being a nice guy or a kind guy? Like, what are the signs of a nice guy?
Yeah, a nice guy, and there's going to be I feel like everything has. I read a book several years ago called Egonomics, and it talked about how every virtue, if taken to an extreme, can be a negative. So an example is, like, if honesty is great, but if you're overly honest and direct, you can become blunt and it can be a turnoff. Or what's another good one? Like punctuality is something that people appreciate, but if you're overly punctual, you become rigid and inflexible and maybe militant. And so some of these things that I'm going to talk about here might sound like good things, but you have to understand that the context that they're practiced under, or the intentions behind them, could be negative. And that's where the problem comes into play. So one of the signs that you are a nice guy is that you're a giver, and specifically that you give with the expectation of like earning somebody else's approval. There's a hidden agenda. There's something in it for you. You don't necessarily give freely. You give because it makes you look good to others, or it might score points. So nice guys are typically givers. They also tend to be fixers. This is something that I definitely relate to. A fixer is like when somebody has a problem, or more specifically, when they're in a bad mood, when they're sad, when they're depressed, they immediately jump in and start fixing the solution, trying to provide fixing the problem, trying to provide solutions. And they do this for two reasons. One is because they come across as the hero, kind of the savior figure. Like they like to swoop in and find a wounded person and fix them and make them feel whole again, because it gives them a sense of purpose, and it reflects back to them the idea, like it contributes to this persona that they're trying to create, which is like, I'm so good and I'm so wonderful and everybody can lean on me and trust me and I'm a nice person. But on the flip side of that, there's also an intolerance or an inability to be the reason that somebody is sad or upset, because it conflicts with that image they're trying to maintain of being a nice guy. And so if somebody is sad or upset and it may not even be because of something that they did, but even if you assume it's something you did, a nice guy will dive in and try and fix the problem because they don't want to be the one who is responsible for somebody else's pain, in large part because it would damage that image.
Gotcha. It's almost like they're emotionally enmeshed with someone else. They're only happy when their partner's happy. When they're sad, they take that blame upon themselves.
Yep.
And they take responsibility for someone else's emotions.
Yep. That is another great sign of a nice guy, is that emotional enmeshment. That I know a lot of nice guys who feel guilty if they are happy or content with life and their partner is going through something difficult. Maybe they're sad or depressed. They feel almost an obligation to take on the emotions and the problems of other people. And it shows that it shows a sense of like a lack of self. Like they haven't developed a sense of self apart from their partner. And so they're insecure when they experience something separate from their partner.
Gotcha. And they're so afraid to hurt their feelings or whatever, they don't ever take a stand for themselves.
Right. Yep. Another thing they do is they're constantly seeking approval. We kind of talked about this already, but nice guys thrive on approval. especially approval from women. So they're consistently doing things to get validation and acknowledgement from others, to kind of, once again, support their nice guy persona. And a lot of times, and we could talk about this a little as well, they do nice things because they expect other people to reciprocate in kind. We call this covert contracts, where you kind of make a deal with your partner, but you don't let your partner know that you made the deal with them. And then you get angry when they don't fulfill their end of the deal.
Any examples of that?
Yeah, like a great example is, maybe you've been taught that the way to get your wife in the mood for sex is to like do the dishes and clean up the house, and we'll call it chore play, like take care of the chores. And if you take all that stuff off of her plate and maybe tell her to go take a bubble bath while you take care of all that stuff, then she'll give you sex. And then if you don't have that conversation with your partner, and then you come home one day and you do all the chores and you vacuum and you do the dishes and you tell your wife to go have a bubble bath, and then she gets out of the bubble bath and goes, "Thanks, honey, that was really great," and then climbs in bed without initiating sex, or she kind of turns you down because she's still exhausted, then you get grumpy and belligerent and upset and frustrated, and you start to pout and throw a tantrum because you didn't get what you expected, despite not having asked for it or communicated clearly that that was your expectation.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely. These nice guys seem like chameleons.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the most brutal thing about being a nice guy, when I started learning about like what a nice guy actually is, the worst part about it was realizing that who I thought I was actually the antithesis of who I actually was. I think the hardest thing for me to learn is, I was very conflict avoidant, which is why I ended so many of my relationships and never got married, is because things would be going great and then a conflict would come up, and I didn't have the emotional fortitude to actually sit in the conflict and work through something. And I couldn't also bear the idea that I might be responsible for something that might cause dissatisfaction for my partner, which, like, that resistance to conflict also turned me into a liar. And I spent a lot of my time trying to hide aspects of myself from anybody. Anything that would tarnish this idea that I'm anything other than perfect, I would hide from people. And so I would overtly and directly lie about aspects of my life to preserve my self-image. And my thought was like, well, if they don't know about these ugly things or these difficult things or these things that I'm doing that might cause them pain, what I'm really being, I was a little sanctimonious. I'm like, I'm really saving them from the heartache of having to deal with the conflict, you know? And so it's better that I lie and they don't have to deal with the disappointment, and I don't have to deal with the discomfort of being honest, than it is to tell the truth. And when I started realizing that I was that person, it was really hard for me.
I can see how one would have a hard time having a intimate relationship with someone if they're never completely sure where they stand on things. Like, you need honesty and integrity to have that intimate relationship.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, physical intimacy requires emotional intimacy. And emotional intimacy, I love when Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, and how, like, the literal definition of vulnerability is it's exposing yourself to the possibility of being hurt. So the best metaphor I can think of is like, you take off your armor and you may not get hurt by the other person, but because your armor's off, there's a possibility that you could be hurt. So you're putting your trust in the hands of somebody else. And if you want to experience physical intimacy, it requires you to be vulnerable. Like, there's nothing more vulnerable than you can experience in life than physical intimacy, than sex, because in order to have good sex, you have to be physically and emotionally vulnerable. You have to allow yourself to be seen in a way that you probably haven't ever let anybody else see you. And because in order to have that type of relationship, it does require emotional intimacy as well. Nice guys are so committed to hiding so much of themselves that it's very common for them to have terrible sex lives, because they can't access that emotional intimacy. their partner can't connect with them. And they might come across initially as selfless lovers, but they turn into selfish lovers.
Gotcha.
So,
Last night as a family, we watched the movie Little Woman, the old version. And the main character, Joe, has two suitors, her childhood friend, Teddy, and the German professor, Frederick. And when Teddy proposes, it's all about like, I'll do everything for you. I'll make you happy. We'll never argue again. Just accept me for who I am, or just accept me and I'll make your life great. And she can
there's like
see
a sense of desperation.
Yes.
Please love me, please.
Right. Take me. And she can see right through that lie. And she declines that proposal and she's upset that she did, but she held on to herself. And then Frederick, she can trust because she asked him to read his writing, and he tells her flat out, you can do better than this. You've got more in you. And she's offended at first because of that. But at least she knows he's being really honest with her. So when he later on tells her that he wants to be with her, she knows that's coming from a place of integrity. So he's the kind guy, as and Teddy's like the nice.
He was honest, but he wasn't cruel.
Correct.
Whereas Teddy was dishonest and cruel.
Yeah.
Because he was dishonest.
Right.
Can I tell you a story about how I was a Teddy?
Sure.
So I was engaged to a woman before I met my wife, another woman, and I ended up calling off the engagement. And part of the reason that the relationship didn't work out is because I was a Teddy. I was a nice guy. And what happened was my fiance at the time was experiencing a lot of anxiety. She was uncertain about like whether or not she really wanted to get married. I think she felt like she kind of got caught up into a whirlwind and said yes to marrying me without being certain about it first. And then the doubts started to creep in and she got a lot of anxiety. And like, I really loved this girl and I wanted to marry her. And so my solution was to be the fixer and solve the problems. And so I'm like, okay, you've got anxiety. If that's the problem, then let's fix it. So here's the plan. There are a lot of things that you can do to help deal with anxiety. You can get 8 hours of sleep or more. You can eat healthy. You can meditate. You can exercise. You can see a therapist. You can do all these things to help kind of manage the anxiety that you experience in life. So I'm like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wake up extra early every morning and I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to wake you up and get you out of bed and we're going to exercise together. And then I'm going to make you a healthy breakfast. And then I'll check up on you throughout the day. And then at night, I'll make sure I leave in time so that you can go to sleep early enough that you can get enough, like 8 or 9 hours of sleep. And then I'll wake you up the next morning bright and early again. And we'll do another workout. And that would be the pattern. And I became her caretaker. Like I was no longer a partner. I was more like a parent who was making decisions for her. And it just made things worse. It made me less desirable. And 2, it made her feel like she had no sense of freedom. It probably made her feel trapped and obligated. And her anxiety actually escalated. And it made it harder for her to choose me. And then in the end, I got upset that she wasn't choosing me, and I broke it off with her. And I was really upset. And I was like, oh, she just could never choose me. She could never choose me. But in hindsight, after looking at how I was a super nice guy trying to solve her problems and placate her, I think I contributed significantly to the ending of that relationship without even realizing it.
Gotcha. You mentioned something that stood out to me: caretaking versus caring.
Yeah.
Can you briefly talk about the difference of those two?
Yeah. So I think caretakers are often people who are caught up in a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry, and they don't always do what's best. They just do what makes them feel good or feel calm, something that takes away their anxiety. So a caretaker is somebody who puts everybody else's needs before their own. And a caregiver is somebody who takes time to take care of themselves. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. So it's coming out of a place of strength instead of weakness.
Exactly. A caretaker typically gives out of obligation or fear. If I don't do this, then something bad will happen. Whereas a caregiver gives voluntarily, and they only give what they're capable of giving without over giving to the point where they become resentful. Um, a caregiver is the type of person who always knows what's best for other people. Like you see somebody who's struggling or dealing with a situation, and it's like, oh, I know the solution, and let me prescribe the solution and tell you what to do, kind of like I did with my ex-fiance. You have a problem, it's anxiety. I know how to deal with this, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to follow this plan, and you kind of become the manager of the problem. Whereas a caregiver is somebody who trusts others to know what's best for them and will be there to give empathy and to provide empowerment and to support people on whatever path that they choose, to whatever treatment path they choose, but they don't swoop in and try and solve all the problems. Caregivers typically create anxiety in other people and in themselves, or caretakers, whereas caregivers alleviate that anxiety and that pressure. So you can kind of see the balance between these two roles. I think the big difference is the anxiety, and the other piece is a caretaker has very poor boundaries. Like they're not clear on what's my responsibility versus what's your responsibility. Whereas a caregiver is very clear what they're in control of, what they're responsible for, and then what other people are responsible for, and what they're not responsible for on the opposite side of that.
That's great. So I'm convinced that I'm a nice guy, and I need to recover now from that. So where do I go from here? What's next?
It's a good question. And I want to preface the answer by saying that there's not like a 12-step process to not being a nice guy. I call myself a recovering nice guy, because those tendencies to be a caregiver or to be a problem solver or to lie so that I can uphold a positive image of myself, project a positive image of myself into the world, like those are always there. And you can gain mastery over those weaknesses and those intimacy killers, but they might be things that you struggle with for the rest of your life. And I don't want that to be discouraging, because like marriage is something that you work on your entire life. It should be seen as a challenge, something that's exciting, but just don't think that it's an easy fix. So that being said, I think the first step is nice guys have a lot of armor on. Like they have that veneer on the outside, this like spiffy persona that they've created that looks really good to the world around them. And they are terrified to take that off because they are so ashamed of what's underneath. Underneath are the lies and the ugly truths that they've been hiding from people. They are the things that they're most insecure about. And it's a terrifying, terrifying thing to like take off that armor and expose your true self to the world. And so I would definitely advise any nice guy who is listening to make sure that if you're going to start doing this work, start with somebody that you can trust, who it will be a safe place for you. That might be your partner. But if your partner, maybe if your relationship isn't in the greatest place right now and you're not sure how your partner is going to receive you, find a men's group or find a therapist or a coach, somebody that you can create a really clear agreement with, that they will receive whatever is underneath that armor from a place of non-judgment. I think that's a key first step. Thanks. I think that's where things can go especially wrong is when you are a nice guy and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to stop doing this. And then you start to try and be more honest and transparent with people and it's not received well. Like it's easy to go back and double down on the strategy that doesn't work. It's not going to get you what you want, but it's what feels safe. And so finding that person to talk to, I think is a really good place to start. The next step I think is spending some time reflecting and journaling on the ways that the things that you do to gain the approval of others, or to project a specific image of yourself, not because it's who you are, but because it's how you want other people to see you. So start thinking about what are those things that I'm doing to get external validation, to get the pat on the back, or to build up that image. And then on the flip side, what are the things that I'm scared to share? What are the demons? And what is this thing that scares me about those things? Like, a better way to say that is, what am I afraid that the people that I love will say or think if they knew this about me? And start like listing out your fears and getting clear, like, what am I scared of? What am I afraid of? What am I protecting myself from? And that can be a really good place to start getting clarity around who you are at your core, and give you a place to start to know where and how to start sharing.
Gotcha. I heard a recovering nice guy, before he was married, would take time for himself, go to the gym, eat healthy. After he's got married, is very much a caretaker, to the detriment of his own caretaking. He didn't take care of himself. So part of his step for his own recovery was, I'm going to go to the gym every day. And it was met with a lot of resistance, but he kept at it. And all of a sudden he was sleeping better. He was in a better mood. He was feeling better about himself. So he was able to care, like, in the good sense, and be kind to others around him. So sometimes you just need to stop and take care of yourself.
Yeah. Yep. There's so much to unpack there, but one of my favorite lessons that I've learned in my life is from a guy named Satema Gali. He's a Super Bowl champ and a coach for men. And one of the things he said is, the story that you tell yourself the most is the story that you will believe the most. And if you tell a story to yourself through your actions or your words or your thoughts that your needs don't matter, that everybody else's needs come before yours, then you start to believe that deep down you don't matter, that you don't have any value, that your needs and desires aren't important. And when you believe that your needs and desires aren't important, then you don't have any incentive to communicate those needs and desires. There's no motivation there. Why would I communicate it if it's not important? Everybody else's needs are more important than mine. And that can definitely contribute to that aspect of nice guy syndrome.
That's great. And it's a sign of maturity when you can take care of your own needs instead of relying on someone else. Like, a child is dependent on their parents for their own needs. But as an adult, you need to learn how to take care of your own needs.
Yeah.
That means a lot in a marriage when you're in a partnership with someone that can take care of their own needs.
For sure. And mothers aren't supposed to be attracted to their sons, and sons aren't supposed to be attracted to their mothers. And when you're in a relationship and you turn your wife into a mother and you turn yourself into a child, it's not attractive. It's not sexy. And I think about, we can take this all the way to a sexual relationship. If you have this propensity to think that your needs don't matter, or that it's hard for you to speak up about your desires, you become a selfish lover. Like, initially it might be great because you show up and the focus is all on your partner and it's all about their pleasure and their enjoyment and their orgasms. But eventually they start to realize, like, this is one-sided, and they start to feel weird because there's not like a connection. It's just like one-way giving and one-way receiving, and there's not a reciprocal relationship, which deprives them the opportunity of also giving pleasure, which is part of having a sexual relationship. And then what typically happens is kind of like what we talked about with the chores. Like, if I do this for you, you'll do this for me. That happens in sexual relationships as well with a lot of nice guys. They show up and they think, I'm going to be an amazing lover and I'm just going to give her all the pleasure and all the orgasms and all the attention. And then back in the back of their mind, they're thinking, and then when we're finished, she's going to turn around and do that for me. And because he's never said, this is what I want, this is what I enjoy, this is what I desire, this is what I would like, she is left with nothing to draw on. And if she doesn't deliver on his expectations, then he can become a resentful lover or a rageful lover or a withholding lover. He might start to punish her or withdraw and not connect with her anymore. And it can be a really, really damaging thing. And it all starts with not being comfortable talking about what you want.
Gotcha. And the other end of the spectrum is bad too. When you look to your spouse to take care of your needs,
Yes.
like sexual needs, that it's her responsibility to take care of me sexually. It's her responsibility to fill me up sexually. And then now she's now in the caretaker role, and that's totally unsexy too.
Yeah, I think it's very common for a nice guy to want something from his partner. And then if he doesn't get it, he'll pout and sulk and throw a tantrum and punish his wife. And then he may end up getting what he wanted, which was sex, but he doesn't get the type of sex that he wanted. Like maybe she's not as into it. Maybe she's not enjoying it as much. And he'll either, you know, on the one hand, he might use that tool for a while, but eventually he realizes that it's not the type of lovemaking that he wants. Like what he wants is for her to he wants her to give him what he wants when he wants it, and then to be also excited about giving it to him. And that's not how life works. Like sometimes you just don't want the same thing at the same time. And a nice guy will throw a fit, but a more integrated man, a man who's more differentiated, a man who has a solid sense of self, will take a rejection or a no with grace. They won't take it personally. They won't take it as a reflection that they're not enough or they're not worthy of pleasure or that there's something wrong with them sexually. They can take a rejection and say, oh, you're not in the mood. Okay, let me know when you are, without making it into a thing,
Right. That's great. There's a lot of advice out there for couples who are struggling sexually, but then there's also not enough advice for couples that are already in a good place. They're doing the date night. They've, they're acting out of kindness, not niceness. What tips do you have for them to take their sex life that may be plateauing to the next level? What are your black belt sex tips?
Oh man, I don't feel like I'm a black belt in sex yet. So it's hard for me to say that these are like pro tips. These are some things that I'm working on, that I think would definitely, I'll share with you what I'm working on, and maybe they will inspire you to do some cool things as well. So one of the things that I've been focusing on a lot lately is eyes open sex. Like I think it's really common for couples to like turn out the lights, close their eyes when they're reaching orgasm, and kind of try and shut out all distractions and external stimuli and like almost retreat inward before orgasm. And I think a more powerful way of experiencing intimacy and orgasm is like being fully present with your partner for that experience. And so keeping your eyes open, making eye contact, like being really engaged and in the moment with them. It's not always an easy thing to do, but when you do it, it can really kind of take things to the next level. And it can be an incredibly bonding experience to have together. That's one thing. One other tip that I have is I did an interview recently with a woman named Bea Voce. It's on my YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. And she talked about role play. And I've always been a little scared of role play, like this idea of like costumes and characters and like scenarios, and it felt really awkward and out of reach for me. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, there's been a kind of a fantasy of being able to set up scenarios that are a little bit more forbidden, or out of, they go beyond just like me and my wife in the bedroom, the typical stuff that we typically do. And one of the things I learned during this interview is it was such a great takeaway. She talked about how role play you don't necessarily need to come up with a whole backstory and new personality and stuff. the best way to start doing role play is to take an aspect of your personality, some sort of characteristic, and amplify it. And so you'll have to go watch the whole interview if you want to see all of her advice. But I love the idea of taking a subsection of your personality that that you want to explore and turning it up to 11. So maybe that's like flirtation. Maybe you want to be a better flirt and you just want to act, just you want to be you, but you want to be you with your flirtiness dialed up to 11. Or maybe maybe you want to explore like anger. And so you be you, but with your anger turned up to 11. Or maybe it's you want to explore innocence, or you want to explore, there's all these interesting like areas in our brain that we're curious about that we don't get to explore very often. And exploring them in the bedroom can be a really fun way to kind of experience something new and novel and fun without having to like go to like a bar or a restaurant and be and wearing a different set of clothes and be like, oh, what's your name?
Right.
And so anyway, that's something that I'm committed to experimenting with over these next couple of months and years is how can we mix up our love life by changing how we show up, not necessarily in part by like how you dress and how you act, but like what aspects of your personality are going to be most present during that exchange. And then creating agreements around that so that you feel safe and comfortable, and then allowing yourself to explore these areas of your life and personality that often go unexplored.
That's great. If people listening to this want to learn more about what you do, how can they reach you?
The best place to go is check out my website /podcast. It's growthmarriage.com. I actually just started this year making my podcast into videos. And so the YouTube channel is a lot of fun. Just search for The Growth Marriage just about anywhere on the interwebs, and be fun to hang out with you.
Very good. Thanks.